guys, welcome back to another math lesson with Mr. Walker. I'm glad you didn't get your fill yesterday and you're back for some more. That's awesome. In this lesson, we're going to kind of build on what we learned in the previous lesson and see if we can recognize some different patterns and things that are going on that help us move away from using the place value scale or the place value chart like we have here, and get us to do it more visually, kind of picture it in our heads. And look at some other patterns that we can use instead of relying on this place value chart all the time. It's not a bad tool to use, of course. It's a great tool to have, but we want to be able to do it visually as well. So that's what we're going to kind of practice with today. So if you have your place value chart to start with us, that's great. We're going to do a couple together using the place value chart, and then we'll see how we can start to visualize it in our heads as well. So the first thing I want you to do is, these are the two problems we're going to be looking at to start, right? We have 367 times 10, multiplying by 10. Then we're going to do the same number, 367. This time we're going to divide it by 10, okay? So we know when we multiply by 10, we're going to make a bigger number, right? We're going to move to the left on that place value chart, and we're going to create a bigger number. When we divide by 10, we're going to be making a smaller number. We're going to be moving to the right on the place value chart and making a smaller number, okay? So I want you to pay attention to both of those things as we go through, and see if you notice any other patterns that are developing based on what we're multiplying by and the amount of spaces we have to move the numbers and things like that. So let's take a look at our first one here of 367 times 10. We know that if we multiply any number times 10, we're going to be moving to the left on the place value chart. We're going to be making a bigger number. So I'm essentially just taking this number here and I'm sliding it to the left, okay? Making a bigger number. So my hundreds, my 300s that I have are going to turn into 3000s. My 610s are going to turn into 600s, and my 71s are going to turn into 710s. Everything is getting bigger, right? We're making a bigger number. One thing though that I have to keep in mind is I got to fill in this spot here, right? I can't just leave him empty. So what we're going to end up doing is just putting a zero in there. All right, so put a 0 right there. I know it's kind of squiggly, but you get the idea. There's my 0, okay? So when I take 367 and I multiply it by 10, the new number that I get is 3,670. So that's the new number. That's when we increase it by 10. Now, what do you notice about this number and maybe what we're multiplying it by? Do you notice any patterns that have developed? Anything that you can see that can maybe help us out, help us visualize this, make it a little bit more easier to compute? Well, what I'm noticing is that we multiplied by 10, which has 1 0 on it. And would you look at this? Now we have 1 0 on the end of our answer. That's interesting. Let's keep an eye on that as we move forward and see if that repeats itself, if maybe that's a pattern we can use. All right. So that's cool enough. So now I'm going to reset, and I'm going to set this back to 367, and this time we're going to divide it by 10. Okay, so I have 367 again. I'm going to divide it by 10. That means we're going to be moving to the right on the place value chart. We're going to be making a smaller number, okay? So if I were to think about it this way, right? Dividing by 10, everything is going to move back a spot, right? Divide, divide, divide. And if I were to take this number and move everything back a spot, we would end up with 36 7/10. 36 7/10. Okay. So we made this a smaller number now. I don't have 367 anymore. I have 36 because my hundreds became tens, my tens became ones, and my ones became tenths. 367 divided by 10 is 36.7. 36 7/10. Okay. Let's take a look at one other thing real quick. When we had 367, our decimal point was right here, right? We don't usually draw it in whole numbers if we don't have any decimals, because you don't need to see it. It doesn't really play that much of a role. But if we were to pretend that the decimal point was right here, when we multiplied by 10, now the decimal point would have been right here. So it moved from here. It moved to the right one spot, right? It moved over one spot. That let all the other numbers move to the left. The decimal point just moved to the right. That's kind of interesting. And then look over here. 367 again, the decimal point would have been here. And we divided by 10. And that decimal point moved to the left. That's interesting. And it moved one spot. One spot. One spot. That's kind of interesting, right? So I'm seeing a couple patterns that I think are developing here. So we're going to keep an eye on those as we move forward. We're going to do another example and take a look and see if some of those things hold true, okay? All right, so real quick, let's take a look at one more example. This time I have 4,367 times 10. Then I have 4,367 divided by 10. So again, if we multiply by 10, everything's going to get bigger, right? Everything's going to shift to the left. So this 4,367 is going to become 40,000 or 43,670. So we're going to need to add in a 0 over here for sure. Okay. And our 4,367 now became 43,670. And again, if we look at that decimal point, it had moved one more spot where we had to add that 0. It had moved one more spot, right? We added in that 0. So when we multiplied by 10, which has 1 0, we moved the decimal point one spot. Interesting. Let's see if the same thing happens here when we divide. Okay, starting with my original number of 4,367, I'm dividing by 10, which means I'm going to move everything to the right. So now my new number is 436 and 7/10. Let's go ahead and write that down real quick. 436 and 7/10. So now that decimal point moved from here at the end where it was, right? It moved from here at the end, and it moved to the left one spot because all of our numbers shifted to the right. So the decimal point moved over. So when we divided by 10 with 1 0, we moved the decimal point one spot. Very interesting. So the same kind of thing is holding up as in the first one, even though we have a different number that we're starting with. The decimal point is either going to move to the left if you're dividing or to the right if you're multiplying. So a couple different patterns we can start to see here and keep in mind. That way we don't have to rely on this place value chart so much. So we're going to step up our game here. I'm going to give you guys another example, and I want you guys to try to work through this, and then we'll talk about it together, okay? All right, here's your number and example this time. We have 215 and 6/10, and we're going to multiply that by 100, okay? Take a look at those zeros. Think about the pattern that we had in our last example. So 215 and 6/10 multiply by 100 times 100. What do you think that would be based on some of the patterns we were seeing previously? Try to work this one out, visualize it, work with it on the place value chart, whatever helps, and then we'll come back and discuss it in a second, okay? All right, well, this time, if we're multiplying by 100, we're going to shift the digits 2 times to the left, okay? It's going to move twice because there are 2 zeros in the number 100. And also, if you think of it as 10, 10 would move us one spot to the left. 10 times 10 is 100, so we're going to have to move 2 spots to the left, okay? So this number, 215 and 6/10 is going to move 2 spots, okay? So now we have a new number of 21,560. So there would be a 0 here. Go ahead and write that in just so we have it, 0 here. 21,560 because we shifted 2 spots to the left, which means that decimal point moved 2 spots to the right. 1, 2. We had to add in that 0, right? 21,560. That's our new number. We moved 2 spots to the left, which means the decimal moved 2 spots to the right. We had to add in that 0. We moved the 2 spots because there are 2 zeros in what we're multiplying by, okay? Let's try the same thing now with division. What's going to happen if we take that 215 and 6/10 and divide it by 100? Where do you think that decimal point is going to move? Where do you think those numbers are going to shift to? Go ahead and try that out real quick, and then we'll come back together and talk about it. All right, awesome. So I'm starting with my original number, okay, and I'm shifting it 2 spots to the right now since we're dividing, right? We're going to make a smaller number. So I'm going to go 1 and then 2. So our new number is going to be 2 and 156 thousandths, right? We're in the thousands place to end, so we read it as 2 and 156 thousandths. So I'm going to go ahead and write that up here, 2 and 156 thousandths. And we can also think about it this way. I had 2 zeros in what I was dividing by, which means I'm going to move my decimal point 2 spots to the left because it's division. We're making a smaller number. So when I move it 2 spots to the left, I'm left with 2 and 156 thousandths, okay? Thousandths. Hopefully this is starting to click and to make a little bit of sense. We're going to try one more together. This time we're just going to visualize it. We're not going to rely on the place value chart. We're just going to kind of talk about some of the strategies that we've seen and some of the patterns that we've seen and use those to help us find our answer. Okay, so here's our two examples that we have. We have 3 and 7/10 times 100. We're multiplying that by 100. Then we have 3 and 7/10 and we're dividing it by 100, okay? So the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of think about this a little bit. And I want to start to visualize where it's going to sit on the place value chart. Even though I don't have that place value chart drawn out, that's totally fine. Just kind of think about it and say, okay, if I'm multiplying by 100, I'm going to have a bigger number, right? I'm going to have a bigger number that I'm working with. So if I multiply by 100, my numbers are going to shift this way, and my decimal point is going to move this way, okay? So kind of think about that for a second, and then do the same thing with the division. If I have 3.7 or 3 and 7/10 and I divide, I'm going to be making a smaller number, right? So you can kind of visualize that, see where those numbers are going to move, see where that decimal point is going to move. And I want you guys to, on your own for a minute, think about that, visualize it yourself, and then tell me, what do you think your answers would be if we were to multiply by 100 and divide 100 by 100? So go ahead and work that out, and then we'll come back together and we'll talk about it. So this time we're going to do the same thing. Think about the rules that we have used. Think about the patterns that we've seen. And I'm not going to worry about that place value chart yet, right? What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to think about the amount of zeros that I have. So I have 2 zeros here, and I'm going to be making a bigger number, right? So I got to figure out where I want to move this decimal point in order to make a bigger number. Now, if I move my decimal point this way, right, if I move them to the left, well, that's going to make a smaller number, because now I went from 3 wholes to now I have 3/10. So I don't want to move the decimal point that way, right? I'm multiplying, I'm making a bigger number, so my decimal point is going to move to the right. So now that I know my decimal point is going to move to the right, I need to figure out how many times it's going to move. And since there's 2 zeros in what I'm multiplying by, I'm going to move that 2 spots. So I'm going to end up having to add another 0 in here, right? And my decimal point is going to move right here, so my new number is going to be 370. Okay, 370. Now the opposite's going to happen when I'm dividing, because I'm dividing, I want to make a smaller number. So that decimal point, if I moved it this way, it's going to make a bigger number. So I'm going to move my decimal point to the left, and I'm going to move it twice because there's 2 zeros in what I'm dividing by. And I'm going to have to put a 0 right here, right in this spot here. So my new number is going to be 37 hundredths, because the last number is in the hundredths place, so I read it as 37 hundredths, okay? So that's how we would solve those, using our number patterns and using some of the rules that we've seen to find our answer. That's how we would work our way through and solve those two problems. So I hope this helps you guys kind of see some of the patterns that we could notice when we're multiplying and dividing by 10 or 100 or even 1,000. You just pay attention to those zeros, and if you're multiplying, you're going to make a bigger number, so that decimal point is going to move to the right. If you're dividing, you're going to make a smaller number, so that decimal point is going to move to the left, which means that the digits are moving to the right, okay? Practice this with this some more. If you need that place value chart to help you still a little bit, you can use it, but I want you guys to start moving away from that and relying on it less and less and kind of visualizing it in your head like we did previously. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. And I thank you guys for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, thanks.